there's a treasure in the hills. To find it, you need to travel along windy country roads that haven't changed much in 50 years, or follow a lazy river that flows from cool northern lakes. It lies hidden in a valley that's seen everything from farming to Revolutionary War battles to innovative manufacturing. It isn't hard to find, though it helps to have a map. It lies just beyond the reach of the hectic world that surrounds it, and those who live there wouldn't want it any other way. A walk through Glenville is like a trip through the history of Greenwich and New England. Every turn shows how the traditional exists beside the new and innovative. With the 350th anniversary of Greenwich upon us, let's take a journey through Glenville and learn a little about the area that may just be the best-kept secret in Greenwich. Traveling north from downtown Greenwich along Glenville Road brings us to the crest of Sherwood's Hill and the first glimpse of Glenville's history. A small private cemetery is the final resting place for many of the Sherwoods, one of the first families to settle in Glenville. In 1634, Thomas Sherwood sailed from England for the New World. In 1674, his son Stephen was granted a strip of land by the King of England between the Mianus and Byram rivers, much of which became Glenville. Part of this original land grant lies at the bottom of Sherwood's Hill. It's best known as Sherwood's Farm. Most folks remember a time not too long ago when they could drive around the pretty flowered pond and buy fresh eggs, chickens, or a Thanksgiving turkey. The farm was run by another Thomas Sherwood, a great-great-grandson of the original. Tommy's farm was a favorite stop for everybody until about 1978 when he closed up shop. Further along Glenville Road are signs of Glenville's early farming history. Fences made of stone cleared away by farmers still snake across many parts of town. If you know where to look, you'll even find stone foundations of long abandoned farm homes. During the Revolutionary War, Greenwich and Glenville became agricultural centers, providing products from here to New York. This rest stop was actually part of the original Glenville Road and the site of a Western Union telegraph office. The building is now a private home. At the intersection of Weaver Street, there's a modern service station. But set the clock back to the turn of the century, and you'll find this was the site of the Jarrett family store and service station. Turning up Weaver Street, we find a home that's the oldest existing building in Glenville. It was originally called the Hyatt House and was built in the mid-19th century. Continuing on, we soon find ourselves in Deep Gorge. In the early 1900s, plans were made to construct a railroad through Glenville, and the path was actually cleared through Deep Gorge. But the plans were abandoned, and the railroad never made it through. It's hard to imagine how different Glenville might be if the railroad had become a reality. Further along Weaver Street is the development known as Lyons Farm. Before the homes were built, this indeed was a farm, named after another of the earliest settlers of Glenville, Thomas Lyon. After coming to America from England around 1630, Thomas Lyon was given a land grant from the king in 1676. Together with the Sherwoods, the Lyon family owned pretty much all of Glenville and guided its growth for centuries. Back to Glenville Road, and we arrive at the classic brick structure of the Western Greenwich Civic Center. Constructed in 1921, this building was originally Glenville School, though by no means was it the first school in Glenville. As early as 1756, Greenwich had 9 school districts, including Glenville. The school year was only 6 months long. Early records show that in 1857, the Riversville Octagonal School was built on Riversville Road north of Sherwood Avenue. The building is now part of a private home. This small brick school building held classes from the late 1800s until overcrowding forced students to attend classes in scattered locations all over town, creating the need for a much larger structure, which was built on Glenville Road. In the early 1970s, the new Glenville School was built on Riversville Road and is looked on with pride as one of the finest and most modern elementary schools in the Greenwich school system. Going past the Civic Center on Pemberwick Road leads us to one of the most famous landmarks in Glenville, the Mill. It's now a beautiful complex of homes and shops, but the mill has a history that dates back to the 1700s. Originally built by Solomon Reynolds as a grist mill, it used the power of the Byram River to turn the giant stones that ground corn and wheat into grist to feed cattle. At the time, it was the only mill of its kind between Greenwich and suburban New York. Eventually, the Reynolds family converted the grist mill into a factory that produced cotton goods and blankets. Ownership of the mill changed many times. During the Civil War, the urgent need for military supplies prompted the changeover to producing felt and felt products. In 1899, the old mill became known as the American Felt Company. The famous monk's foot logo was its familiar trademark. It represented the story of the monk who padded his sandal with a patch of lamb's wool and by walking on it, eventually pressed it into felt. The felt mill was best known as a major producer of piano felts and felt for cars and aircraft, but it was also one of the first mills in the world to have electric lights. In 1881, people would come from as far away as New York City just to see the fabulous 52-watt generator that powered its lights. That generator, now on display in Dearborn, Michigan, was one of the first ever made by a young man named Thomas Edison. The felt mill closed for good in 1978, but not before establishing itself as an important part of the Industrial Revolution. The felt mill wasn't the only growing industry in Glenville. Further down Pemberwick Road at the intersection of Comely Avenue, there are a few modern office buildings now. But this was the site of the first plant of the Russell, Birdsell and Ward Company. After starting as a small button company in 1830, these enterprising men built a thriving business based on the manufacture and sale of the first bolts and nuts used in assembling stoves. The company grew to become a major supplier of metal fasteners and moved to larger quarters in Portchester. Like the felt mill, Russell, Birdsell and Ward relied heavily on the Byram River in its manufacturing process. Legend says that the name Byram came from the Armonk and Kokomong Indians who would travel up the river to buy rum, but nobody can prove that for sure. The river is fed by Wampus Lake and Byram Lake, which lie north of Glenville in New York State. Now, the two streams flow into Greenwich and join together near the Merritt Parkway, where the official 15-mile stretch of the Byram River begins. It flows through Glenville, then Pemberwick, and continues as the state boundary until it finally empties into Long Island Sound. As important as the Byram River is to Glenville, it once proved to be destructive as well. In 1955, a huge hurricane hit Greenwich, dropping so much rain that the river overflowed its banks. The destruction was especially bad in Pemberwick, where homes were flooded and some even swept downriver by the rising waters. Shortly after, a federal and state flood control project was begun to ensure a disaster like this would never, ever happen again. As we head back toward Glenville on Gray Rock Drive, we find the home of the John Sobieski Society. As industry and farming in Glenville grew, so did its need for people. Glenville soon became home to a large group of Polish and Irish immigrants who formed the backbone of manpower needed to keep the community thriving. Since then, the Polish Club has been a center for social activity and community service in Glenville. Back on Glenville Road, we now come to the center of town. The community center, now the home of the American Legion, was dedicated in 1954. It was built by the Glenville Community League as a center for recreational and social activities for the people of Glenville. It's truly a feeling of community that one feels while passing through the center of town. The names and the businesses may change with the times, but the friendly neighborhood feeling has always remained. The Glenville Fire Company is headquartered right in the middle of town. This firehouse was built in 1951, only a few hundred yards from the original firehouse. Built in 1903, the original Glenville firehouse served the community for 48 years. Once the new firehouse was built, the old building was put to good use. It's now home for the members of the 9th District Veterans Association. Having represented Glenville in 4 wars, it's the largest veterans association in Greenwich. The 9th District Vets are proud sponsors of several community events, like the Memorial Day Parade. A monument to their members who have fallen in battle was dedicated in 1951 and stands in a place of honor right in the center of town. Crossing the Byram River is a stone bridge that has more history than meets the eye. The original name for Glenville was Sherwood's Bridge. In 1779, a Revolutionary War battle took place on these shores that saved Greenwich and Stamford from being conquered by the British.